You're listening to Being Built, where innovators and tech leaders like yourself share stories about how building product builds you along the way. I'm your host, Aaron Davis. I'm sitting here with Paul Powers, founder of Physna and Thangs, right?
Right.
And I'm sure you're excited to tell us more about that. What are you building?
Sorry?
Tell me about what you're building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So Physna is a weird name, so let me start with that part. Physna is short for physical DNA, and that's why we pronounce it Physna and not Physna.
Okay.
About 50-50 what people are going to assume when
Right.
they read it the first time.
This is what happens when you pick an interesting name for a business.
A weird name. Yeah, although no one has a hard time with Thangs.
True.
I think it's kind of a funny name, but they don't have a hard time pronouncing it. Even foreigners really, the TH you would think would be more of an issue.
Right.
But it hasn't been as big of a deal as I thought it might be.
Physna was intuitive to me. That's what I presumed it to be. Maybe I've heard it spoken. I don't know.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's cool. So anyway, what we do, so it's called physical DNA for a reason, and that is that we found a way to represent physical characteristics like geometry in like code, like math. So if I were to take this glass, and don't worry, I won't actually do this, but if I were to throw it against your wall and shatter it, right, then it would break into millions of little tiny pieces and stuff, and your carpet would be all messed up. But if we had the 3D files for each one of those shards of glass, and then for the original glass, the whole, we could tell you, hey, all these belong in this glass, and this is how they go together, right? And we can do that again through this code. And when I explain it like that, people still like, well, that sounds like an interesting science fair project. But what's the point of it? And the point of it's really, if you look at software as a whole, even though we live in a three-dimensional world and we're going into a new era where, whether it's through the metaverse or generative AI, the amount of 3D content we're going to be exposed to and consume will be 100x or more by the end of the decade compared to now. The process of designing things in 3D is really unintuitive. It's not easy to do. And less than 1% of software actually supports 3D at all, let alone can do anything with it. Open a 3D model. And so you have software for software's sake. So you have things like GitHub, and you have Google, and you have all these tools which are used for information gathering and for two-dimensional applications, essentially.
Yeah, sure.
But as soon as you get into 3D, there's nothing. And so finding a code kind of acts like a new technical primitive. It allows us to essentially do anything with the physical or three-dimensional, it can be an animated file, sure, a 3D file that you can do with 2D. So things like search, right? Right now, if you were to go onto the internet and try to find a 3D model, just pretend Thangs doesn't exist for a second, and you try to find a 3D model that's very specific. Let's say that you have a washer, and I don't mean like a washing machine, I mean like the actual little hardware component. How would you look for that specific washer? You look at washer, you're going to find all kinds of things. Washing machines.
It's funny because I often do exactly that because I'm kind of a do-it-yourselfer. So I've looked for a washer before,
right?
And it's a real pain in the ass. I guess I would say half-inch washer or something.
Maybe, yeah, but then you're still going to find all kinds of things, right? Or if you find like
washer's probably too easy a case because it's mostly 2D. But if you were to say like a piece of lumber, then you have to define all the dimensions, and I don't know. I guess I go to Lowe's.
You go to Lowe's with the washer that you need, and you'd see, because it's not just the width; it's the diameter. And a washer is a very simple example, but with screws you have threading, and these are all simple examples. But I've actually been to Home Depot once trying to find a screw and had to bring one with me and just kind of hold them up.
Exactly.
I had no idea what the right size was, and so what this does is it removes the need to do that. It's if you upload that screw or that washer, whether that's a 3D scan of it that you take, or if you have the file, we can find exactly not only what that washer is for you, so find the exact model, but we can also tell you where it's used. So kind of like I can take the shards of glass and put them back into a glass. I can take that washer and say, this is everywhere in the world where you've seen a washer like this, or the screw being used. And so it's useful for things like search. So if you're in the process of designing something, so you're a mechanical engineer or an animator or something like that, think of it like autocomplete, right? So, or autofill. You start to design something, and again, it doesn't have to be a complete part. We take that geometry and say, where else have we seen this? And then we can tell you, hey, I think we're designing this. Is this what you want to design? And we can speed that up. There's a lot more applications than that, but that's a simple one I think most people understand. But the number of applications are pretty wide and broad, and the reason why isn't because we set up to build a thing that did everything. It was just that core technology opens up a lot of new capabilities. So that's Physna.
Then
I'll briefly give you Thangs. I spent a lot of time on that. Thangs we realized that that capability is only so powerful as the database that you're searching against, right? Like Google's search technology, if it was an application just for your computer, wouldn't be all that exciting. You'd be like, search my files, right? You wouldn't discover a whole lot of new stuff. And the ability to find things and show differences between versions is great, but it only really becomes powerful if people can do that in a group. And it's set in, again, not just individualized, not just in your computer. So we thought we should probably create something that's more broad, like a GitHub for the engineering and design part, plus a Google for the part discovery, the content discovery. And so Thangs was, we called it Thangs. To be totally honest with you, the reason why we called it that was because, well, first of all, the name was a joke, but it stuck. And we didn't call it Physna because at the time I was really unsure if this thing was going to go anywhere. I thought maybe, we can do all of it from a technical perspective, but will anybody ever use this thing? Or is it just going to flop and cost us too much money and we shut it down and then people say, oh, Physna didn't work, and then they're connecting the two and this is an experiment. Now it's complicated for the other reason, which we have two different names in one company. But it's grown like crazy. We've grown faster in terms of both users and models than any 3D platform in history. We get more models uploaded now every week than all the other 3D content sites combined do. And then we also crawl the web, so it really is like a Google.
You're scraping, pulling.
For 3D, yeah.
Do you think the engagement with Thangs is in part due to what your audience understands to be the capability of Physna?
Increasingly so, yeah. So at first it was just that because we were scraping all these models from around the web and we had people uploading them, it was like people talked about us as a Thingiverse alternative, or they're like, oh, this is a good place to find models. And also they'll search Thingiverse for you. So just go here and search, which is fine. But then we started adding in more capabilities that really highlighted what makes us unique, right? Which isn't data collection. It was data analysis. And so when we added the ability to do a geometric search, and whenever you open a model on Thangs, it'll say this is what's geometrically related to it. If you click on view related on the search result, it's not just going to look for the same word. It'll look for everything that's similar to it, geometrically and in appearance, et cetera. And so that we see an increasing number of people using that. It's increasing faster than any of the other capabilities in the site, and was growing at the same rate. And it's only possible because of our understanding of the geometry of these models. Is we call, especially what we call workspace, but it's also known as flow now. We kind of have a couple of different products in the product to make everything nice and complicated. We're simplifying it down. But
marketers come to the meeting or what?
It got a little complicated. But essentially, think of it as the GitHub functionality, right? So when you upload something, we have another tool called Sync. Again, these are all the same thing. Let's say that you're a 3D designer. I'll explain how you use things. So you probably have a 3D design tool on your computer. The most popular one right now and the fastest growing is Blender. It's taking off. So we built this plugin where from Blender you can just say I'm looking for a whatever, and you see the license to know if you're allowed to download that and use it or not. But you can search. You can import that model that you find through Blender through the add-on from Thangs directly into Blender. Now you got your starting point. Right now, what we have, it's not out in public yet, but we have it working internally, is the ability to geometrically isolate something and say, so let's say you open up let's see if you model a sword open. And you're like, okay, I really like that hilt, but I don't like the rest of that sword. Or vice versa, right? Like, does anything else have this hilt? And so you can actually just highlight that hilt and do a geometric search, and it'll say, these are all the hilts that we found that look similar to this, right? And so that's something that you can do that automatically. You can see how that helps you in the engineering process. To put it in perspective, right now, the only way that you can pull in models into Blender outside of Thangs, which is a free add-on, is you have to pay for these add-ons that, like, I'm going to probably get the numbers wrong, but it's like $400 to have access to like 38 trees. Oh, wow. Yeah. So like if you want to make a video game, you're going to spend a lot of money paying people's data package, whereas we make everything free. We don't make it free. If it's, if we find it and it costs something, it costs something. But, our models are always free. And the access to it's free. And then from there, let's say that when you're saving things, normally you save it to your computer. So it's the sync capability, all it does that is as you save to the folder, it automatically saves it to Thangs as well. And so let's say that you're in the process of, let's stick with the sword. You're designing the hilt, you're designing the blade. Maybe you start to work on the character around it. everything gets saved into again, not just your folder, but also gets synced up into the cloud. And then if you ever want to know, like, when was the version where I added that one, that characteristic that I really liked, like the basket around the hilt or something like that, but I got rid of it. What version was that? You can go into Thangs and it'll show you, with visual comparisons, like this is the difference between each of the versions that you have.
Oh, wow.
You can add people to collaborate. And so this is what makes it where it gets really interesting is now you can say, okay, I want to work on this project with somebody else, but they don't use Blender, they use a different tool. And so how would you do that? Well, traditionally, you basically have to argue with them and to figure out what tool you're going to use. I mean, there are ways that you can get around it, but it's really inconvenient. Okay. And version control just wouldn't exist, right? I mean, you'd have to find another program and very, very manually try to find a way to, after converting files, it would be a huge effort just to see the difference between two different things. So what this does is it allows you to add a collaborator on. They can use whatever file format they want. They can upload it. And as you see versions happening, there's a whole workflow combined. So you can say like, okay, Eddie has... So
somebody could be using Blender. Somebody else can pull files or content from a different tool.
They can design a different tool. And then what you can do is, so traditionally, like the only way that you would be able to like really collaborate with somebody on a 3D project like this, what everybody uses in the industry right now is PLM, Product Lifecycle Management. Okay. It's the worst collaboration software ever. I've been to PLM conferences that I've actually spoken at where they said like, next year we're changing the name to not have PLM in it, even though it's a PLM conference, because it's like the most hated software. It's awful. And it's really like, the search is like the Dewey Decimal System. I mean, you have to like know the number for everything. You can't just search for what it is. Okay. The collaboration, like the way that you work together with people is also archaic. I mean, you can't work on it together. You have to literally, it's again like the library, check something out, which means no one else can touch it till you're done working on it and you can check it back in. So 4 people working on it, and they need a day each. 1, 2, 3, 4 days. 4 day deal. But we decided was like, well, why do you have to do that? Why can't you just allow it to be, automated? Why can't you just merge the versions like GitHub does, right? And so we decided to do exactly that. And so let's say you're working on the hilt of the sword, someone else works on the blade, and your other friend's working on the character, and then somebody else is working on the clothes or whatever. You can put them all together into one character the same day.
What's difficult about that? Why did it take so long? It's one of those things you think, why hasn't this existed? Why wasn't this here 10 years ago, right? Well, there was something difficult about it. I'm sure you guys had some hills to climb.
There were a couple of things. One is that core tech, right? You have to be able to make what's 3D as easy to understand as what's 2D, right? Or basically make it so that software can work with 3D as if it were 2D. And so that was the biggest hill we had to overcome. Okay. The second thing is actually a little more mundane. That is just that other than a couple of companies who cater to mostly mechanical engineers, like Autodesk and Siemens and Dassault, there really isn't a whole lot of investment in software for 3D. In fact, most of the co-founders that I'm friends with, they work on things like essentially other DevOps tools and stuff for other software people. Yeah, not all of them. Some of them work on totally normal things, but you don't see a lot of people working on tools for other industries. Yeah. And when you think about it, the majority, even the less than 1% of software focuses on what's physical or 3-dimensional for that matter. Over 80% of our economy is based on what's physical. True. And so it's like there's this huge divergence of where we spend our energy in technological advancement and where the demand is. And I don't think people realize just how big of a problem that is. So the short answer is people just haven't bothered.
What do you think that 1% will be 10 years from now? The percentage of software that's used in the physical world, as opposed to strictly in data and processing data.
I think it'd be huge. I think what we're going to see is something very similar to what happened after the iPhone came out, which was the number of software engineers skyrocketed because everybody wanted an app because you had software in your pocket all of a sudden.
A mechanism for utilizing software. Exactly. So everybody wants software.
And so everybody wanted it. So when we tell people that we work in 3D, we very often get asked like 3D printing. It's like, dude, everything here, you're 3D. Everything in your life is 3D. It's not just 3D printing. I mean, I've got nothing wrong. I would love 3D printing. Don't get me wrong, but like it's so much more than that. As we start to see these devices get released, and I know that Oculus is a really simple, VR experience, but it made it. I mean, you can get an Oculus Quest for $200 and have an experience that 2 years ago, 3 years ago would have cost you $8,000 and had all these wires attached, and it would have been a nightmare. When you see what comes out now in AR, that's really going to change everything. I have the the luck of experiencing some of these more advanced AR solutions that are out there, like the HoloLens and stuff like that. Not everybody's tried those, and they're so overwhelmingly awesome that when you just imagine, I mean, I'm already wearing glasses. If this had that in it, I would be willing to pay much more for the glasses. And also you would use them constantly because there's so much you could do with it. And so as that becomes more ubiquitous, that experience becomes ubiquitous, the consumption becomes more ubiquitous, suddenly there's going to be this big need for two things: content and the ability to actually make tools for that. And that's where we think we're going to fit in.
Yeah. It is not hard to see the demand for exactly that. The path there is tricky, and I'm sure you're figuring that out. So, what's the state of your business? How are you doing compared to how you wanted to be doing 2 years ago?
Well, I can tell you that Thangs has blown up way more than we thought it would. Way beyond our expectations. I mean, it was supposed to be something to augment the core enterprise solution. It turned out being like the thing.
That's awesome.
So most of our energy actually is starting to go into Thangs now.
Okay.
An enterprise that we found is that, so we had this theory, and I still maintain that there was that it wasn't, based on what we knew, it wasn't a bad idea at the time, but it needed some tweaking. The theory at the time was Thangs can help us bottom up, and enterprise sales will help us top down, and they'll meet in the middle, right? And so if the big companies are using this, and then the suppliers use Thangs, and now you're using that for sourcing and all this. I mean, that was the theory, and there's a lot of demand for exactly that, but the problem isn't on the Thangs side. The problem is on the enterprise side. These companies take forever, and you have to convince them to put their data in the cloud, our cloud, not theirs. And that turned out to be a monumentally difficult ask. And you would get so many companies where you would have this amazing reaction. You'd have 15 people from the company, even from like the C level of the company coming in, a huge Fortune 100 companies. You're like, there's no way we're not going to get a deal. And it's not that you don't get the deal. It's that they're like, okay, well, our IT department's screaming like, no, this has to be on-prem. You can't use this. Who the hell is this little startup? They basically have your most sensitive data. I mean, if you're, say Boeing, for example, and you give us your data and then we delete it or we do something bad with it, you corrupt it, you're no longer a business, right? It's almost worse than giving your financial data over to somebody else.
That's some of the challenge you ran
That was the most challenging thing. And so even after you get all of the security compliances and everything, which we thought was the main hurdle, it still turns out to just be a really slow process. So what they'll say is like, okay, we're willing to take this bet, but we're going to do a POC. And obviously it's a new category, so nobody had a budget. So we can only do so much this year. And if it goes well, then next year we'll sign a real deal. We're a VC backed company. We can't work in multi-year cycles.
3-year deals.
Right. No. So that just proved to be such a difficult thing to do that, I mean, don't get me wrong. If Thangs wasn't working out, we would absolutely go all in on it. We would make it work. We would make it work. Yeah. It's not that enterprise isn't viable. It's that it's when you compare it to the insane growth of Thangs, it's like, why fight so hard on this to make this work?
Man, believe me, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've struggled myself with the market not doing exactly what I thought it would do, and instead I get these other pennies from heaven, right?
Exactly.
And I think that is the key to being a great founder, is being able to listen. And it's not always black and white. It's not clear. The message the market tells you is not always very clear. They don't always say, I want this, and I want it this way, and I want it for this much. So that's interesting.
We'll still get the business. The thing is just how fast. I think that if you were to ask me, what would I say about enterprise? I would just say it can't grow as fast as Thangs can. It can't grow exponentially like that. And it also, to some extent, it's just right product, wrong year. Most of these companies are moving to the cloud. Most of them are just now, if they're working with the government, getting new security guidelines they have to follow that do allow certain types of cloud usage, but they're new and companies they're slow. And so I think right product, wrong year, in the sense that in a couple of years it won't be as big of a challenge.
Man, you made a really good point about selling into, when you really innovate there's no demand for it. There's a demand for what problem that solves, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure you've heard the jobs to be done
Solution.
concept.
Yeah. People want the solution.
There's a demand for that thing to be done, but however however the market defines your services or whatever has something to do with, or that says something about how they budgeted, right?
Right.
So where there is no budget set aside for whatever this thing is that you're making up, right? And everybody's inventing things, right?
Right.
And nobody's budgeting for those things. You're budgeting for the problem that has to be solved. And that is a tricky thing that I think a lot of innovators run into, is figuring out, and that objective is sometimes shared by multiple executives, right? Yeah. That objective is not one guy's job because we haven't found a nice little bucket to put it in yet.
Exactly.
So that's tough. I sympathize with you. I've been on both sides of that. I think I did sales for a while, and people services technology for which there was no demand because it wasn't known to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it was about demand creation, and that does take time. That is hard. It is an uphill battle. So that's really cool that you found some downhill opportunity in Thangs, though.
Well, I think that Thangs is going to lead to those opportunities because if you look at how Slack went to market and how GitHub even went to market, right? They got so much bottom up support that eventually that was their way into enterprises. I think that's just how that'll just have to be how we do it.
That former employer I was talking about, whenever we paid for our Slack license, it was because the developers were like, "Hey, I need this.
Exactly.
Give me this. Why are we using these crappy chat tools?"
Well, they actually came up with
Slack. I didn't go looking for solving a problem or whatever. It was demanded of me to approve it.
Exactly, right. And Slack actually came up with a formula. I think it was 2,000 messages. If you send someone 2,000 messages, or if there have been 2,000 messages sent over Slack in your company, you now kind of need Slack, and now we should start to charge. That's kind of was the business model, and and whether there's many different ways you can go about charging, but if you can find that point where it's like, okay, this is the tipping point where companies they need to upgrade, they need the more advanced services.
You prove some dependency there.
Yeah. That's a little bit more of a valuable way to go. And so what we're doing right now is we're taking all those enterprise capabilities, starting to merge them into Thangs and the API, and we're making APIs out of a lot of the enterprise capabilities too. So if somebody's like, hey, I need this, one of the challenges we faced when we were more SaaS heavy versus PaaS was even after you go through all that challenge I was telling you about, right? And we were successful. We do have big contracts.
Yeah.
They just were really hard they took forever,
right?
To finally get them. Most of them, some of them were fast, but most of them weren't. And but even then, the problem was like, okay, now you have to actually get the workforce to use a different tool, than they're used to using, and because what we do has so many different use cases, like even within one company, people would say, okay, well, our engineers are going to use this to design faster. Our supply chain team is going to use this to identify standardization opportunities, to consolidate orders from different vendors into one. We're going to 30 different parts and they're all the same from 30 vendors, order 30 times as much from the best vendor, right? Have more resiliency in our supply chain and save some money. So, and then people in the field will use it because we have this 2D to 3D capability now, where more accurately than a traditional image recognition, we can point out exactly what that is because we understand from the 3D models every orientation. So, if someone were to take a picture of something that's kind of laying in a weird position, we can tell modeling like that looks like it's a washer, for example, but it's like this is that specific washer, and this is where it goes. That's how you can use it. So, when you have 3 different groups in a company who are going to be using the exact same interface, that's challenging because it requires them to change their way of working. And so I realized that APIs are a faster way to shake things up.
Who's going to benefit the most? Who's the primary user who's going to use Thangs in particular?
Yeah.
Who's going to use Thangs the most? Is it a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer? Like what kind of
people who create?
Anybody who's creating a physical thing?
Yeah.
Or a 3D thing?
Yeah. That's why I prefer saying creative because it's, I used to say an engineer, but I realized that actually not necessarily an engineer anymore, right? Yeah. Also, 3D needs to become easier, more democratized, and we're doing everything we can to help that. But the process is going to become easier over time. Right now, what I think is a lot of people were like when generative AI became a big thing earlier this year, people were freaking out saying, oh, it's going to kill creativity. And my point was like, no, it's not. The way that it's being released now is not how it'll actually be utilized for real in the future. And we did an experiment to show that even with a small data set, which we did not take from the Thangs users, we took it from like Amazon Berkeley Library, 8,000 models, right, publicly available. And we showed them like, hey, we can actually not only create individual 3D models out of this, we can create entire scenes out of text. And they said, well, and we did that because we were told before that, oh, that's impossible. You need to have billions of models. And we're like, no, you just have to understand how these models are related physically, geometrically to each other. When you do that, you can do this. The reason I mentioned that is because that small data set proves that, like, let's say that you are a designer and I keep going back to the sword thing.
Yeah.
Let's say you're working
it makes me want to see your office because it seems like you have cool stuff hanging on the walls.
We have a lot of weird
I've
stuff
got
hanging on the wall.
a Star Trek picture or Star Wars picture, and you're talking about swords and stuff. Like, oh, that could be fun.
We don't have a lot of swords around the office, but
No.
more like the Star Trek. With 3D printing, you can make whatever. So we got a lot of random stuff.
That's fun.
But it's, I don't know, I'm fixated on that example now. So let's say that you're designing you're working on a video game, right? So you've designed maybe 500 models in the past, let's say. We can take those 500 models into account to get a sense for your style, right? Like, for your aesthetic. And so instead of saying like, hey, generate an orc holding an axe, and I'll switch it up, an axe for battle. Instead of it looking like it would look for everybody in the world, it looks different. It's more, it's catered to Aaron style, right? And that's something that we think that might not be the end product. You might want to adjust that, whether that's through text or something else. But we
You're approximating somebody's defaults or whatever. Yeah.
The whole point is that we think that you can get there more easily, and the idea that it's going to take away from creatives, in my mind, is wrong, because generative is one example, and we're not building out that generative AI thing ourselves. We have the capability to, but we're really more focused on the utility, for the people who are already working on it. But my whole point is that type of technology in general is going to mean that if you have a creative idea in your mind, you can envision, this orc with an axe. The problem is not, hey, how do I get this 3D software to allow me to design something that I can see clearly in my mind? It needs to be as simple as, if I can explain it, or if I can draw it, or if I can, do anything, the easier the better, right? If you could just take it out of your brain and put it into the machine, that'd be ideal. But how do we make it as close to that as possible? And by doing that, you open up creativity, right? You make it so that everybody can unleash their creative energy.
The creative process of getting an idea or a vision out of your head, whether it's a business model, a piece of art, a functional, tool, whatever it is so difficult and so wrought with errors that anything that can get us closer to extracting that concept or solution from a mind to an item is a great asset, and a long way from being able to eliminate the need to do that, right? I'm not intimidated by that at all, and I really don't think people should be.
Well, I'm not saying
a softer clay or a better, a firmer wood or whatever else doesn't make those artisans or whatever intimidated.
Well, I'm not here to defend generative AI. My whole point was just to say, like, because of how much data you can extract from 3D, you can actually, whether it's generative or not, you can use AI to make the whole design process easier.
Yeah.
And so, getting back to your original question of like what percentage of software is going to use that, not original question from a little earlier, I'm pretty sure that it's not just going to be for the content and also further, AR tools. I think it won't just be a larger percentage of people utilizing or consuming 3D. A large number of people will be creating it, would be my hope, right? Because a lot of people have great ideas, they just don't know how to make them real.
Computer Earl Grey. That's where my head went, right?
Earl Grey.
Like that's a Star Trek reference, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Jean-Luc Picard. Like, how long before we've just got a console in every room that prints whatever we want, whether it's tea with all the tastes and everything else. That's what these ideas that you're talking about inspire that degree of progress. It's kind of exciting. So I'm a big fan, and I hope it catches on in time. And the right year is right around the corner. That's my hope.
I would hope it would be too. I think that there are a few things in technology that are quote unquote inevitable, right? I think the internet is one, because it's one of those things where it's technology is a force multiplier, right? So if you have the internet, you have many more capabilities and much more power to unleash your creativity and your productivity than you have if you don't have the internet. cryptocurrency doesn't have that. And not to offend anybody here, but like when crypto didn't do so well the past few months here, I wasn't terribly surprised because there's not an objective hard need for it. There are use cases for it. I'm not saying it's not useful, but it's more like, we all agree that it's useful, therefore it's useful. Whereas it doesn't necessarily provide as direct of a value. Whereas things like AI have a very direct value. If you can design 100 times faster than your counterpart, you're going to get.
It feels like an inevitability.
Ahead. Yeah, it feels, and also just technology can't remain flat forever, because again, you're going to have more of an advantage if you have the ability to create in 3D. Not only can you design products faster, but if people like if you can only design in 2D, that can't you can let's say that you're a really great artist. But you had no idea how to animate anything. So that can be used as a picture. Maybe you can use that in cartoons and certain types of animations. But if you can design in 3D, that can be used as everything from CGI to a product that's manufactured to whatever. Right? I mean, there's a lot more capability there. That extra dimension does something. It's kind of like going from binary or not binary code, from Morse code to binary code, where you go from dot, 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 which isn't really all that exciting, to everything that is the current world of technology we live in. I think adding that extra dimension from 2D to 3D will have it be kind of similar. Yeah,
I can see that. So what's next for you? What's the next big challenge that what are you most concerned about over the next year or so?
Well, I mean, the economy right now is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And so I don't like to worry about things that I can't control, because I can't control them.
Well, you can control how you respond to it, right?
Right.
But Viktor Frankl said the last of men's power, or whatever, is your ability to control how you respond to circumstance.
Exactly. Very perfectly said. So over the next year, the big challenge is going to be how do we react to make sure that we're surviving and thriving in this market. Unfortunately, it might result in some of the progress that we expected to happen with like augmented reality glasses, et cetera. Maybe that'll slow down. Maybe it won't.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll accelerate. I have no idea. My hope is it accelerates, but that's something I can't really control.
That's right.
But I can't control, though, is making sure that the product continues to grow, that the exposure grows, that the capabilities are made not only available, but they're made easy and readily obvious. Because one of the bits of feedback that we got when we did an Ask Me Anything session over Reddit was, man, I wish you had this. I wish you could do that. I wish you had this capability. And like 75% of the requests we already had. And we're like,
oh, really?
We just put this button right there. Like we thought it was obvious, but it wasn't.
Interesting.
And just because we think it's obvious doesn't mean it's obvious.
That's a great problem to uncover, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, not really.
How hard is that to solve?
Sort of. Well, it's not hard. Well, it's not necessarily hard technologically to solve. It's just it's an awareness thing. It might mean that the buttons aren't made, bold enough or something, or maybe they're too hidden.
They say if you push on a pull door, it was a bad design, right?
Exactly.
So if they couldn't find the button or the feature they were looking for,
that's on us, not on them.
Yeah, that's right. That's good, though. That's good that you found it.
Exactly. So that's why we love doing things like AMAs and Ask Me Anything sessions and stuff like that, because we learn so much. We do a lot of user interviews.
Nice.
And it's not like every single request turns into a product feature, but if you start to hear that enough people are saying the same thing, it becomes clear, right?
That's right.
And what really matters is that you hear what problem they're trying to solve. What are some creative things that they've used your technology for that you didn't even think, of even being a use case? I remember when we first launched Physna, people came to us with, the initial idea behind the whole company was intellectual property protection. That was it.
I remember you referencing that, and then as Physna came to be, I'm watching articles that get shared on social and whatever, and I didn't understand the connection.
There wasn't one.
Okay.
To make IP protection work, we had to have this really high bar where every 3D relationship was discovered and codified. Because otherwise, if you take really stupid example, but you take Mickey Mouse's head and put it on Donald Duck's body, all of a sudden now it's not an IP infringement on Disney. No, it is. So knowing that, I was like, okay, it has any change. It has any similarity has to be identifiable, right? And when we finally got that to work, we didn't really know we didn't know every market in the world and every problem it had, right? We knew that there was a problem here. But then we got inundated with requests, which was funny because we had no marketing budget. It was just me giving out business cards at like a trade show. Yeah. But then, the feedback we got was crazy. A lot of people called, and a lot of people had use cases from things like drone inspections to healthcare use cases like early cancer detection, things like automating certain aspects of marketplaces, a lot of stuff in the design field, a lot of stuff in inspection, quality control. I mean, we actually listed over 300 different use cases that, and we didn't track the ones that were wrong. We didn't, where we said like, no, that's not what the software does. We just tracked the ones that were accurate. Like, yes, in theory that would work.
Okay.
So there's a lot that it can do.
Yeah.
Now that's both a blessing and a curse, right? Because okay, well, I can do a lot.
Then you got to pick a lane.
I pick a lane, right? And we picked a couple lanes and realized there was a better lane, and there was a better lane, and there was a better lane.
Okay.
And eventually we figured out, the right way to do this is create something that's somewhat democratized, make it available to the world through Thangs, and make some of the capabilities available by APIs, because we don't have to be the ones that create every solution.
Yeah.
Create the capability to create the solution.
Just show what you've done and let it catch fire.
And let people do something with it.
Yeah, that's really cool. How has your team kind of responded to that kind of turn that you've made? The focus from Physna to Thangs. How did that impact your the group of people who are putting these two organizations together? I'm assuming they work hand in hand. And
yeah, I mean, it's one company, right? And everyone knows that. There was a time when that change first started to happen, it first started to become clear, like, hey, this is growing. Like, yeah, this is great, but Thangs is growing like 28x from January to now. And last year it did that, and we thought, okay, that has to be like this early luck or whatever. It was new. We're like, hey, it's going to grow fast at the beginning, but it'll slow down, and it's accelerated. It's not just, it's actually literally exponential acceleration. So we're like, okay, this isn't going to be replicated in the top-down sales funnel,
right? Well, that's what made me think of it, because you take a football team, and it's like, okay, we've got this star quarterback. Oh wow, we just signed this star running back, and now we're a running team. Now we're going to start running all the time. But what happens to that star who's ready to make a throw on every play, right? And so it has an impact on your team when those things happen. I was just
well, the hardest part is, because there's so much money on the enterprise side, and everyone can calculate it. We know the size of these deals, and they can calculate their commissions, right? Yeah. Everyone's thinking about these numbers, and they know that they're attainable. And to this day, even if we stuck with enterprise SaaS, it's not like it wasn't working. It was just slower.
Yeah.
Telling them, no, we're going to put everything into this site that has no revenue, and we haven't totally figured out how we're going to monetize it yet. Right. And I can't give you a forecast or what next year looks like yet. And they're like, you're an idiot. It's like you're throwing away the biggest opportunity of all of our lives to focus on some stupid toy site that this project that you seem to love. And the truth is, no, it's just you have to read the tea leaves. And trust me, no one was more invested in the enterprise side of the business than I was. I spent years doing nothing but that. But part of being an entrepreneur is being adaptable. Learning to know when it's the right time to change, and also when it's not. I mean, we've also had there were times where we had pressure to do, just like focus all in on one or the other when it was too early. When it was like, we don't know yet if Thangs is going to work. We're only seeing very early signs. Also, we don't know that enterprise isn't going to have, move at the speed that we need it to. And we didn't know that Thangs was going to accelerate the way that it did. So, we didn't make the decision immediately. We waited to see what would happen. And I'm glad that we did, because there was a lot of pressure a year ago to almost do the opportunity.
Really?
Saying Thangs is growing great, but
board investors and customers.
Well, it made sense on paper, right? Because it was like, hey, look, you've got all this opportunity in enterprise, and it felt very, very close. And it turned out that it's all there. It's just a little bit slower than we thought it was going to be, because the companies that said they're moving to the cloud, that was more of a PR statement because of COVID. And they weren't actually not as fast as they were saying they were. And so it was like, oh, really? It's going to take you 5 years to do this, or 3 years. This is not going to happen tomorrow. And so anyways, but there was a lot of pressure to like, hey, you're putting a lot of resources into this Thangs thing. You're putting a lot of time into it. Does it even matter? Just focus on what's going to make money really quickly. And, again, you have to kind of say, think long term and realize, no, there's a reason we're doing this.
Yeah.
Frankly, enterprise would need Thangs anyway. Most of the companies who wanted to, who were going to pay for enterprise were, either heard about us because of Thangs, or were excited about maybe one day having the opportunity to use that as a venue to source from suppliers, right? Like if I find that I have all these nuts and bolts, I can find out where I can order them from, right? So there was a lot of overlap there, and it made sense to, keep it going. can't say that we didn't predict the future, but we played our hands well enough to where we have won.
Yeah, that's good. Are you optimistic about the next year?
Very much.
All right, good.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think recession's got everybody kind of anxious or whatever, and you can't really. It's harder to forecast in a context like this, but it doesn't mean you can't still be strategic about how you're going to win, right? You may not know the depths or the lengths to which you'll win, but you still kind of know how you're going to win. So,
well, recessions are an opportunity and a danger, right? I mean, whenever things get messed up in the economy or whatever, it's both a risk and an opportunity. And if we can play it right, we can become even bigger than if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I view it as a challenge, not as a threat so much.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's a threat to survival. We're luckily in a good position financially, technologically, with momentum. I mean, we couldn't really ask for much more. Would have loved it if some of these deals moved even faster, but actually it could be that the best thing that ever happened to us was that they took a little bit longer than we thought. And we decided, let's make a really bold move and not kill everything there, but like, let's really pour our energy into
redirect
things.
a little bit. Surprise, you have twins.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly.
Well, that's good. I'm glad your team's kind of responding to that now. It sounds like they kind of took a little nudging, and I'm glad you were able to see that coming. And
it took a little nudging, but you know, they see it now. I mean, everyone does. Even people who are, you know, all of their salary depends on, or not all of it, but you know, most of what they'll earn will come from commissions. They even agree, like, Thangs is where that.
What's the most, speaking of commissions, you kind of referenced that, your sales team and so on. Like, what's the most critical competency for your organization to be successful over the next, year or two? What is it that you're most focused on building up or hiring or kind of mastering, learning inside your organization? Is it sales?
No, I think it's two things. It's product-led growth, right?
Okay.
It's making sure that we stay innovative, that we take advantage of the opportunity that we have.
Mm-hmm.
We're a couple of years ahead of really anything I would consider real competition.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to keep and advance that edge. We need to make sure that we're hiring really, really high level talent, like some of the like world class talent, and things like.
But for you, it's about product development.
It's all. I think it's mostly product.
Okay.
There's a degree of marketing too, but it's mostly going to be product. It's going to be marketing. It's going to be awareness, and then there's going to be the question of how do we make sure that when we do commercialize this, which won't be that far away, that we do it right and we do it, we really think through how, exactly how we're going to do that. And not only it's going to put off users or, be a detriment or make people think that, oh, this is a money grab. It's got to be something that is almost altruistic. And it's like, hey, if you want, it's free, it's going to stay free. If you want to do this other thing, then you can pay, but for obvious reasons, that's going to be important. So just maintaining our growth, maintaining our technological edge. That's the most important thing. And, we will figure out the monetization side. I'm not worried about it. We've got a plan, but
you don't want to go the Wikipedia route or just once a year. You're like, hey, I see you're back on the site again. Can you give us some money, please? That's the.
You could. I don't think that's not our current strategy.
I liked your reference earlier to Slack's 2,000 messages, and as an analogy,
right.
When you see a user community proving value by using it repeatedly or whatever, it almost gets, remember way back when, it wasn't that long ago when we were all first starting to use social media, we're like, okay, when's this going to start, when are they going to start charging us a monthly fee? Or when are we going to start seeing ads or whatever? And everybody was freaked out about which way it would go. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much, right?
Right.
It's either valuable to you or it's not. You either use it or you don't. If you have to watch ads or whatever. So I think if you've got users who want it, they won't care. That's my particular opinion.
Yeah, it's important to them that we monetize in an ethical way, right? Like
they're going to want to know it won't go away, right? They'll be happy to.
But they also want to know how we're what are we monetizing? How are we monetizing? Are we monetizing? Like we're not selling their data, we're not selling their models.
That's right.
We're, it's transparent. I think the important thing is that the monetization around it needs to be transparent to everybody, and so this is how we're monetizing. There was a huge amount of confusion when we launched it, even up until. There still might be in some circles, even though we've done a lot of interviews about this. Like, how do you guys make money? Everything's literally everything's free. You never add. There's no ad. There's nothing. There's no way for me to give you money. How do you make money? And the answer is we don't. But there's value just in the growth, and
is.
you don't turn on. I mean, Figma is a great example. Dylan Field, he had a $20 billion exit with Adobe.
Okay.
He actually invested in our company, and
Okay.
and
Nice.
I'm pretty well. We did a falconry thing together. It was fun, and he's a cool guy. But like Figma, they waited like 5 years before they charged a penny
Interesting.
just to grow. And
Yeah, I used Figma actually to make a board for real estate firm.
exactly right. So and then like even GitHub took a long time. So we're not going to take that long. We're going to monetize sooner than that. But you know, they do it for a reason. You want to make sure that the top of the funnel, so to speak, is large. You don't want to. There's no point starting to monetize and you have a tiny user base and you're begging people for money when there's almost no one there. And then everyone's like, okay, how much money are you making? Well, nothing, because I have barely any users.
You're innovating in an empty space. I hope I'm not misstating that, but you know, you're not Ubering the taxi industry, right? You're not displacing a pervasive solution that already exists. Am I wrong about that, or are you displacing a bunch of kind of hack job approaches to getting to?
That's a better way to put it, because I think people. The problem's been there. The problem's growing. You know, as again, there's more demand for 3D. There will be much more demand for 3D soon, and people know that, and they're getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just as challenging now, for in most ways, as it was 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, there's very little innovation in the space. So yeah, there are some hacked up, together approaches.
Yeah, your users have been getting it done one way or another.
Yeah,
it's just not been. Yeah, it's been rough. They just haven't had good tools to get that job done.
It's really, really bad. They've been taken advantage of. They've been ignored, and so they're not like an unknown entity. Like we know who these users are. We know what they're in for. We know why. We know how large the market is. So it's not like we're just throwing something out there and seeing. But there's not currently a really good solution that
you're fighting to displace. No. Yeah, that's interesting. It's very different. I was thinking about ethical monetization, and when I realized I was hooked on rideshare services, Uber, Lyft, whatever.
Right.
And then it occurred to me that whenever I had this thought, however many years ago, like they're still not making money, and they displaced the alternative. So I hope they make it. Right? Yeah. Otherwise, everybody and their brother is going to spin up a cab company in a couple of years, right? But your monetization, I suspect, will be welcomed. I know as a just as a consumer in general, when you're getting great value from something, and you get concerned, will this still be here, right?
Yeah.
And so you almost kind of like, well, can I pay something for this, right? When I was using free Pandora back in the day, I'm like, why is this free? This doesn't feel like it should be free, right? And then I found the no commercial version. Anyway, made me feel better. It almost made me feel better to pay for it because I know it's not going away.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we will always have a free version. I mean, the goal is not to take away. I mean, one thing that I love hearing, like stories I love hearing, is about people who are just getting into, whether it's design or 3D printing or animation or whatever. But they go to the site and they find something, and they maybe find a following on there, people who follow their models, or they find a model that inspired them to do something. And hearing these stories, that they give me like chills. You're thinking like, wow, we really impacted all these people's lives. Those aren't people we're trying to take money from.
That's right.
The people. I'm not trying to take money from people. Is a horrible way to put it. But like the way that we want to monetize is by creating real value for people who are going to honestly be better off spending it. And so one of those groups, I believe, is going to be, ironically enough, enterprises, small businesses, all the way to enterprises who say like, hey, my current alternative is I pay $50,000 a year per seat for this on-prem thing that requires us to take day breaks between every version, and I can't find anything. And this is just like an automated, no nonsense, obvious way to solve it. And you guys are charging me a fraction of that. I don't feel guilty at all, and they don't feel guilty about spending. They don't feel bad about spending it.
It's just a matter of getting them to hear it.
They just need to hear it. But
and the users on the ground are the ones who are going to scream and help you sing that.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why you want to have a community, because they do the selling for you. I mean, about 35% of the users we have, we estimate, just from, this is guesstimated based off of just a little bit of analysis that we've done. I think about 35% of them are professional designers who work in typically larger companies and typically are higher earners. These are people who can pay, and sometimes they work in groups and they need this functionality for that. So I don't think it's going to be too hard to actually commercialize it.
I'm thinking of a couple of builders that I know that I want to introduce them to it and see what their thoughts are on it. My son in particular, who's an electrical engineer and works in the power industry, building distribution networks and that kind of thing. So awesome. I'm just curious how he would use it. Well, for the sake of time, we should wrap it up. I could go on for hours talking with
No,
you.
this is
I don't,
great, yeah.
I didn't even get to like my other 15 questions, but it's been a great conversation.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm talkative. No one's ever accused me of
Dude,
being
great
crazy.
content about a great product. I'm really excited for you.
Well, thank you.
So if we can help you promote it or whatever, we'll share this story. I'm glad you came to make this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.